start the sort of live stream of this this meeting. So could I just double check with colleagues when we're ready to start, when we are in a public meeting?
The webcast is now live.
It is now live, yeah. Thank you very much. So yes, thank you everyone, and yeah, delighted to welcome you all to the Solent Growth Forum meeting today. Yeah, genuinely really want to take the opportunity to thank everyone for joining. Conscious we've got a lot of new members for Solent Growth Forum, so thank you for joining the forum. This really is a valuable forum for us in terms of providing feedback to us on our work as a LEP, and we're always looking to continually improve the work we're doing. So your time scrutinising our programs of activity, suggestions for how we can enhance our activity moving forward is really very valuable to us. So yeah, thank you very much. Recognise we've got a lot of new members. We did do a number of sort of private workshops as induction workshops prior to the meeting today, post changes in membership after the local elections, but as this is the first sort of formal meeting since those changes, it might be helpful for us to do just quick roundtable introductions, make sure everyone knows who everyone is. So we'll just ask everyone to do introduce themselves briefly. I will start. I'm Richard Jones. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at the Solent LEP, and I'm going to go around in no particular order, just in the order on my screen at the moment, and it is Councillor Alexis McAvoy who is first on my screen.
Yes, hello. As you said, I'm Councillor Alexis McAvoy. I think I'm here actually representing the District Council, although I'm also on the County Council. So long time since we've met, so I'm looking forward to hearing all that's going on.
Thank you very much. We've got Councillor Tony Denton next on the list.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a councillor at Havant Borough Council. I'm also the finance lead or portfolio holder for Havant.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Bryant next.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here representing Hampshire County Council today as one of their members, but I'm also a member of the Fareham Borough Council.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ken Moon.
Sorry, I was muted. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Councillor Ken Moon. I'm from East Hampshire District Council, Cabinet Member for Economic Development and Rural Affairs.
Thanks, Ken. We've got Jason Grigel on the phone.
Good afternoon. My name's Jason Grigel. I'm a manager of planning policy at Gosport Borough Council.
Thank you very much, Jason. And we also have Councillor Derek Pretty.
Yep, good afternoon. I'm Councillor Derek Pretty from Eastleigh Borough Council, Cabinet Member for the Economy.
Thank you very much. And I think that concludes the members of the Solent Growth Forum that I can see on the call. But we do have a number of members of the LEP team and the executive team, who I will also ask to introduce themselves. So I'll start with James Ford.
Good afternoon, everyone. James Ford, Head of Enterprise and Skills.
Thanks, James. We've got Steve.
Good afternoon, all. I am Steve Footer, Head of Corporate Services and Performance at Solent LEP.
Thanks, Steve. Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Lauren Hartley. I am Corporate Governance and Compliance Manager for Solent LEP. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Lauren. Karen.
Karen Martin, I'm the webcaster today.
Thank you, Karen. Nicola.
Hello everyone, I'm Nicola. I'm PA at the Solent LEP and here to take a note of the meeting today.
Thanks, Nicola. And Josie.
Hello everyone, I'm Josie and I'm a business support officer and I am practicing taking minutes for this meeting.
Thanks, Josie. Josie's one of our apprentices in the LEP team, which we very supportive of in terms of our apprenticeship programme. We've got a number of members of the accountable body team here. So we'll start with James Fitzgerald.
Yeah, hi everyone, afternoon. James Fitzgerald, as Rich says, from the accountable body, Portsmouth Council. So I'm in the corporate finance team. I work directly to Chris Ward, our section 151, and I sort of try and help advise the LEP on all things financial.
Thanks, James. Paul Somerset.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Somerset, the Solent LEP's Deputy Chief Internal Auditor. I've got a little bit on the agenda later, so I'll talk more then about our role.
Thanks, Paul. And then finally, we've got Sophie Mallon here.
Hi, afternoon everybody. My name is Sophie Mallon. I head the Commercial Legal Services team at Portsmouth City Council, acting as the AB for the Solent LEP.
Thanks, Sophie. And I'm going to hand over to Sophie as our accountable body representative shortly to take us through item 1 on the agenda, which is the appointment of a new chair for the Solent Growth Forum. But before I do, Lauren, are there any apologies that we need to formally note today?
Yes, we have apologies from Karen Lucione, who represents Isle of Wight Council, and from Tristan Samuel, who represents Portsmouth City Council. And I don't believe Councillor Core has joined from Southampton.
Thank you, Lauren, for that update. And thank you all for the introductions there. It was very helpful. As I said, I will now hand over to Sophie, who is going to take us through item 1, which is the agreement of a new chair for the Solent Growth Forum moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So, yeah, as Richard said, item 1 is election of a new chair. I've had notice from Lauren at the LEP of a nomination of Mr. Tony Denton, and I just want to confirm if there are any other nominations. Nope, so we'll formally record that there's no further nominations. Is there a seconder for the nomination?
Ken, I can see Ken there's a hand.
Yes, I'm quite happy to second that motion.
Perfect, thank you. And if members are happy, I'll move straight to the vote on the nominee. Perfect. Can I just have a confirmation? Yeah, hands up or brilliant. That's great. Lauren, have you got those? Or Karen? Whoever's formally recording them. Perfect. Okay, I can confirm it's Mr. Tony Denton in terms of appointed chair. And Tony, if you're happy with it, I'll hand over to you to carry on with the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thank you to the members and everybody in the group. Hopefully I won't let you down. And on that note, I think it's time to take item 2, which is the mid-year review of the Solent LEP 2021-22 delivery plan. And who will talk about that for us?
That is back to me, Tony. Thank you very much, and thank you for volunteering to take on the role as chair. That is it is really genuinely much appreciated. So thank you very much. Yeah, and apologies all because it's back to me for item 2 on the agenda now, which is our mid-year review of the delivery plan. So. Just as by way of a little bit of background to this item, the delivery plan that we have in place is a key part of our assurance framework requirements with central government. So not just our LEP, but all LEPs are required to have a delivery plan. And also required to publish an annual report at the end of each year, which sets out how you're getting on against those objectives that you put in place over the year. That's an annual process, and it's a really important part of the process because it does bring out the sort of here and now to our economic strategy activity, which is obviously over a much longer term basis. And this is very much the tangible what are we going to do in the current year piece. So that delivery plan is published on the website for the 21-22 year. It's available on our website. There is a direct link to the report to the delivery plan in the papers for the meeting for convenience. And in terms of the structure of that plan, colleagues will see that it's the work that we do is set against the strategic priorities that we have for as an LEP, which links into our sort of broader economic strategy. So it is about what we can do in terms of supporting our world-class marine and maritime economy, recognising the reliance of the Solent on that sector. It is around climate change adaptation, decarbonisation, clearly a particularly relevant at the moment, and considering the sort of context following COP26 that we've just seen. We have priority around coastal renaissance, looking at how we harness new technology and approaches to revitalise our coastal communities. That's really the place-based element of the strategy. Really, really important, looking at those coastal communities. Work around, again, strategic sectors, looking at our visitor, creative and cultural economy as a key plank of our work. And that really does look at how we capitalise on the Solent's position. We've got superb areas of natural beauty, rich heritage, sort of maritime history and so on. So, building on those strengths of the area. There's a section around developing a world-class talent base, which is the skills of our area, and also around developing an outstanding business environment, and that is the sort of business support activity. And a new priority that we've introduced, hasn't been in previous plans, but is in our current economic recovery plan, and will be in the new Solent 2050 strategy when published before the end of the financial year, is around how we put health and well-being at the heart of economic success. And clearly, following the pandemic, we've seen that has that link between the economy and health and well-being has never been clearer in people's minds, I don't think. So it is structured around those priorities. We also have a section around strategic priorities, and for completeness, that picks up what I would describe as some of our softer powers as an LEP, which might not be as tangible as if you're building a skills centre or investing in sort of highways infrastructure, but it is around those softer things like business leadership for the area, advocacy for the area, how we bring people together using those convening powers, and some of those activities are just as important in my mind as sort of the investments that we make as an LEP. So a very important role for us, as well as the sort of strategy development work itself. So in each of the areas of the delivery plan has a range of activities. There's 30 in total, split across those priority areas. They're in the delivery plan itself in the table. I won't read through all 30 activities. We would be here all day, and conscious of time, but they are available in terms of the specifics, and obviously happy to take questions on any of the specific areas. What you'll see in the paper is we have undertaken a mid-year review of those activities and essentially undertaken a RAG rating on all 30 activities that we've said that we will get on with in the current year. So you can see an overview in that dashboard of all 30 priorities and of all 30 activities and where we are, and also a breakdown against the individual areas. By way of summary, I think it demonstrates sort of relatively strong performance. 21 of the 30 areas are rated green and 9 are amber. And it's important to remember that this is a mid-year review process. So we would obviously hope to turn some of those ambers green by the end of the year, and confident that we will do. But this reflects where we are at the mid-year point. So good performance overall. Got some particular successes around areas such as developing a world-class talent base, where we have been working and developing our careers hub. Things like our health and well-being priority areas, and launch of our sort of one-to-one support program in partnership with Federation of Small Businesses is a good example of activity there. And also in relation to the work we're doing to try and support an outstanding business environment. And I'm not going to go too much further into that particular area, as we're going to take James Ford, who's on the line under the next item on the agenda, is going to do a bit of a deep dive into the business support activity, the LEP, for you under the next item, as it has been such a key area of work over the last year. So some positive areas as well where we have experienced some challenges. So if I look at something like our work around Coastal Renaissance, some really positive progress and investments coming forward, and some real success stories. I think most recently we've seen the Island Line open on the Isle of Wight, which is a really good example of investments coming to fruition. But we do have some areas within that capital programme that have experienced delays. You see, there's nothing red rated in here, i.e. nothing that we think, actually that's not going to happen. What we are talking about is experiencing some delays in some areas where we are seeing that recovery from the pandemic. We are seeing some challenges around areas like supply chains, and again, I'm not going to delve into that too much more here because we've got a little bit of a deeper dive under item 4, which Steve is going to talk through in terms of the capital programme, and James from the accountable body as from a financial perspective. But you'll see that's where that sort of area is reflected. So hopefully that's a helpful introduction and overview to the delivery plan and activity. Like I say, we've got 2 areas of that we would like to go into a bit more of a specific deep dive in. But if there's any other priority areas sort of within that delivery plan that colleagues would like to have a bit of a deep dive as a Solent Growth Forum and sort of dedicated session on moving forward, do let me know. Post today, we'll obviously be working with Tony as the new chair of this group to look at developing a forward plan for 2022, and we can build in those broader areas of review. But happy to take any questions on the mid-year review and the delivery plan generally at this point. Before I hand over to James to take us through the sort of deep dive on the business support element.
Any questions from the members? No. Oh, thank you very much, Richard. I guess on that point, we'll move on to item 3 for James for the mid-year review of the Solent Growth Hub, please.
Hi all, thanks Tony. I'm going to screen share, so please bear with me. It's the big pressure moment when you hope the tech holds up. If somebody could just give me a shout when that pops up, that would be great.
We can see you, James.
Excellent. Okay, so as Rich alluded to, I'm just going to sort of dive a little bit deeper into some of the performance around the business support and the Growth Hub in terms of what the levels of activity over the last 6 months. So just wanted to provide a little bit of context to begin with in terms of how we are measured by government in terms of what the metrics look like and how we have to sort of segment the metrics of the support that we provide. So there's 3 main headings that we are essentially measured under. They are light, medium and high support. So the definition of a light touch intervention is anything where we spend under 1 hour with a business. So predominantly how the types of interventions that we categorize under our light are any one-to-one signposting where perhaps a business comes to us for a real quick question: can you connect me with this support, can you point me in the direction of a grant, etc., that we spend under 1 hour supporting them with. That can be through telephone, that could be through email, it could be through social media. So there's a variety of methods. Events that we might attend and engage with businesses at. So generally our light engagements are the larger number. So if we are presenting at an event, perhaps where we're speaking, promoting the Growth Hub and the LEP services, and newsletter interactions. So we try to send out a regular sort of monthly newsletter that has various levels of support, both internally and externally, and we measure the interaction, so open rates on the levels of support and what people interact with through that newsletter. The medium engagement are engagements of between 1 and 11 hours. So again, how we categorize them and the types of activity that drop into medium, I'm going to touch a little bit later on the actual programs and support that some of this actually what some of this looks like. But again, one-to-one support where perhaps we may have a longer phone call or consultation, as we refer to them. Some people refer to it as a triage, perhaps. So a business that comes in, or I say business, it's predominantly has been established businesses, but we've also seen in the last 6 months a big increase in startups and pre-starts as well. Funding searches, so we have we use a platform called Grant Finder, where we have the ability to do funding and finance searches for businesses. There's been a big increase in uptake in that recently, and any bespoke workshops that perhaps the LEP have organised and arranged, where again we are providing business advice and support. That can vary through from our Maritime UK Solent work through to what has been probably in the last 12 or sort of 18 months, online seminars or webinars of various different levels of support. And the third category is our high engagement, which you might refer to as our sort of intensive support programs. So anything that accumulates of 12 hours plus. So we have a variety of programs where we provide sort of intensive one-to-one support. We do work with external partners to help us deliver some of this support. We don't have all of the expertise in-house. And when we work with external partners as well, it gives us the flexibility and ability to tailor to local demand depending on what the local conditions are. And you may have heard of our peer network program, which is a separately funded program from BAYS that allows us to bring business leaders together in groups of up to 11 that with certain eligibility that work together to help solve each other's challenges. A little bit more breakdown into the actual data. So it talks about the light, medium and high in terms of how we are delivering. As you can see, the bar across the top breaks down, and we've RAG rated it in terms of green. So currently across the light, medium and high, in terms of performance against our KPIs, we're overachieving in each of the three segments currently. We've seen a big increase in the medium engagements over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. So businesses not wanting a quick kind of chat and us signposting them a more in-depth support. So we've looked at tailored some of the programs, which I'll look at shortly on the next slide, in terms of how we've provided more of that medium level of support for businesses. So the actual programs that we're currently delivering, just to give a little bit of detail, and the figures on the right hand side are the current sort of take up to the 31st of September. So as from the 1st of April, we engaged with a local delivery partner, Newables, to offer some support around Brexit. That program has now closed and now finished. We've seen quite a big, we're not seeing any inquiries coming through Brexit related anymore. So we've closed that service down. But up to about, I think, July time, we saw about 15 inquiries that we supported in terms of business. Prior to the 1st of April, we were able to secure some additional funding from government where we could provide some more intensive support around Brexit. We do still have an online support package available for businesses coming through or potentially looking for Brexit support, but there has been a real big reduction in those types of inquiries coming through. Our wellbeing support program, as Rich briefly touched on earlier, is a one-to-one service that we've now expanded into group and online sessions as well. I think there's been it's been quite a hard program to promote. I think wellbeing and mental health is a challenge to get people to engage with. This is purely aimed at business leaders. So we by developing this program, we're not trying to replicate what the NHS or perhaps other charities provide in terms of mental health support. This was predominantly aimed at supporting the business owner with their well-being, noticing the challenges that they have in terms of perhaps feeling isolated. We did see an increase in business owners and inquiries coming through where you know, some of the guys in the team were having some quite emotional discussions with business owners at quite challenging times in terms of how, you know, how they were perhaps going to feed their children and put food on the table. So I think it's been a really welcome service. We started now to complement that with broadening out what that well-being service looks like. For example, we put on a webinar this week around sleep, which was very well attended. I think we had over 40 business owners attend that webinar. We've got future sessions and support that's going to start to look at nutrition and exercise. So would certainly welcome any ideas and thoughts around what else that could look like in terms of expansion. Funding searches, briefly touched on the funding search. I think the reflection that we've had that businesses have needed money more than ever in the last certainly sort of 6 to 12 months, and it's looking at the types of money that is and finance that have been available. Now, some of the funding searches that we found have been businesses that have that are looking for money to survive, but we have seen a trend, and I'll show on a future slide, in terms of there is still a demand for businesses looking for finance to grow and expand, which is really encouraging. The new addition this year has been our work around Maritime UK Solent and the breakfast networkings. So we hold a monthly breakfast network. It's held online currently, but with a view to moving face-to-face to enable that networking to really add value. But currently, I think over 6 sessions, we've had over, we've had 370 attendees at them sessions, looking at a variety of different topics. We encourage and invite in expert speakers. There's been sessions around skills, people, innovation, finance, and where possible, we've tried to encourage the networking and collaboration piece as well, which I think will accelerate once we're able to bring that group together face to face. Our hire programs that are our more sort of intensive provision that we do work with external partners on. So the first one is our digital accelerator program. This has seen the highest uptake that we've seen on any of our high engagements over the last 3 years. As we launched the program, I think we had over 40 applications in the first week. The number reflects the current businesses that have been signed up, but essentially the digital accelerator program is, and this has certainly been accelerated through COVID and lockdown, is trying to support businesses to look at digital solutions in terms of how they can move their business forward. Now, it's quite broad in its remit, that it can support people with perhaps social media presence and how they manage their social media, through to perhaps a bigger business that might be looking to implement a new CRM or a new HR software, for example. But the feedback to date is that's been really well received and lots of value. The second program, Recover and Rebuild, was very much to ensure that we had provision for those businesses that are not quite ready to look at that growth stage again. We're still seeing businesses that are struggling perhaps to pay back loans that they've taken, whether that be B bills, C bills, for example. So the support and advice is very much looking at how the business can get back on its feet, what they can do to perhaps diversify, how they can reforecast, and put themselves in a sustainable position that they can maintain and then look at growth for the future. The third program was our potential exporters. Has seen our lowest uptake so far. We're looking at some activity in the new year where we can be a little bit more proactive, but this was certainly on the back of Brexit, and we wanted to look at growth opportunities and how we can support those that have products or services that could look to take that and sell it internationally. Sometimes it's an untapped market. Sometimes what we found is it's not for every business, but it's very much a program to get people to think of exporting as an opportunity. And finally, as our peer network program, currently to date we have 90 businesses that have that are on our peer network program. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, the peer network program brings together cohorts of businesses, up to 11 business leaders or senior business leaders, digitally online, and it's a network that has a expert facilitator, and it's positioned as what we call action learning. So rather than delivering any form of curriculum around leadership and management, the group are encouraged to essentially put a challenge that they have perhaps within their business, put that on the table, put that out there to other colleagues in the group to try and look at solutions, try and learn from each other, in terms of how others have fixed that problem in the past. Really positive feedback. We've currently we have funding for 14 groups, and to date we had our 9th cohort actually start this week as well. So nationally there has been a challenge in terms of recruitment. We've been recognised as a LEP that has performed really well. We've presented nationally to the rest of the peer network group in terms of what we've done and the activity to try and encourage others and support other LEPs and growth hubs around the country to follow suit and hopefully deliver on their cohorts. Just to drill down into a little bit more of a data, and I'm not going to go through every single number and line, but I think hopefully some of the visuals that you can see gives a good flavour. But we really start to look at the data and the uptake on the programmes that I've mentioned in terms of what that looks like in terms of our spread across our local authority areas. So the table up on the top left gives a bit of an indication in terms of where our inquiries and where our programmes and uptakes are coming from in terms of district. The pie chart next to it gives us a real indication in terms of what the inquiries are about. So we've grouped them into 3 categories. So the blue section is growth, so businesses that are looking to grow. The purple section, stabilise, maintain, is that kind of business that is perhaps just looking to stay where they are, or that has perhaps been through some difficulties. And startups are anything from people that have come to us with an idea, or perhaps need a little bit of help and advice in terms of how they might commercialise that idea that they have. The pie chart on the right hand side gives us a real indication, and we've started to use this and look at this type of data now in terms of how we can work with partners as well in terms of sharing the intel and the types of inquiries that are coming through, so we can start to look at shaping the type of support and provision that we provide. So this provides a really good sort of data set for us to start to look at that. Taking away the yellow section, which is our peer network program, which has seen a big uptake, you can see the green segment is around funding and finance. So in the new year we are looking, there is a lot of other provision, but we are looking at what we can do in terms of finance management skills. The section at the bottom gives us a bit of performance around our peer network program and where we are to date with in terms of recruitment. Something I'd just like to mention that I think we've done really well and had success with is with looking at recruiting to some of our peer networks and ring fencing some cohorts for some disadvantaged groups. So last year we had a group of female entrepreneurs. So we brought together and ring fenced that group. That we've replicated again this year, and has had some real success. We've looked to also add an additional ring fence group this year for ethnic minorities and business leaders. So try to create some safe spaces. It doesn't mean they are unable to access other cohorts, but what we try to do is create some safe spaces for business leaders, perhaps where they feel more comfortable amongst similar peers. Just to give you a bit of a flavour in terms of the difference in the types of inquiries that we've seen and how that's changed over the last 6 months. The pie chart on the left just shows how back in April, there was a much larger demand for businesses that were still looking to survive and needed help and support. But a real positive shift through to September in terms of how that's almost can be completely flipped, and the majority, so 67% of inquiries now in September were very much about growth and moving forward. So I think it's a really positive shift in terms of business confidence and what they're looking to do. So final slide is just to give a little bit of a flavour in terms of what we're thinking about and future direction. So we have, since September, we've actually launched some support around public procurement. We've ran some sessions over the last 3 weeks, which have been very well attended, and to the point of we've had 100% attendance at all of the sessions. So from people that have booked to people that have attended, which I think is wonderful and shows a real appetite for this type of support. But essentially, we've engaged with Cabinet Office and one of the key messages from them was that at least 1 in 3 public procurement contracts was they were looking to push towards SMEs. So what we've tried to do is encourage SMEs to engage and look at that and look at public contracts as an actual opportunity for growth. So we've segmented into beginner workshops, intermediate and advanced, and hopefully what we'll see, we hope to track the conversion in terms of any contracts that are won, so we can measure the return on investment. We've launched a sustainable business support program, noting the big drive around race to net zero and businesses looking at becoming green. One of the big things that we've heard and have get through is very much businesses don't know where to start, they don't know what it means. So we are working with an external partner who will provide what I would perhaps refer to as hand-holding through that whole greening your business program, and we're hoping that that should be live in the next couple of weeks. Future activity around Freeport and supporting inward investment inquiries. We've started to see a big uptake in some of the types of inquiries. So as a Growth Hub team, we're starting to look at the opportunities and signpost out to the various landowners. I think I briefly mentioned and touched on the finance management skills. Again, looking at how we might segment that through to the types of through from sole traders to larger SMEs, noting the difference in terms of what they need, what they might want, and what might actually be practical in terms of their capacity. We're looking to build on our inclusive entrepreneurship piece, so working with female entrepreneurs and business leaders from ethnic minority backgrounds. So we're considering how we can support. I think it's something that's come out a little bit more strongly in the last few weeks is around private investment. There seems to be a bit of a gap locally around any kind of angel network or private sector investment network. So there's some tentative discussions happening in terms of what our role as a Growth Hub and LEP could be in terms of coordinating and convening partners to match SMEs with investors. And some other potential work and conversations that we've been having is with our local authorities around supporting and what support could be to ensure that local authorities are able to get their ARGE grants out, the additional restriction grant money from government back out to businesses. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Would certainly welcome any thoughts and comments from the members. I'll just put a couple of discussion points up on the screen if it perhaps guides a few questions or a few comments, but it'd be good to hear from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Members, are there any questions? No. I'd like to take this moment, if I may. It's item 2. I failed to note or ask you to note the report. Can I ask the members to note the report, please?
Noted.
Thank you. With that in mind, James, thank you very much. It looks like there's no questions, I'm afraid. And so that takes us on to item 4, update on the local growth programme for Steve, I believe.
I'm going to kick off on this one, Councillor Denton. It's all right. It's a joint
Double
effort,
act.
Steve and I. So you were right, really. So yeah, hi again, everyone. So I work closely with Steve, particularly around the local growth deal and the the Getting Building Fund. So I was just going to run through. So we put together reports for every finance subgroup of the board and the board, and generally they sort of come in two parts. One is a general finance update, and then sort of Steve comes in and talks more around sort of like the program specific issues, but it's very much sort of like a joined up piece of work. So so if I just run through some of the financial bits first, and then I'll hand over to Steve, if that's okay. So hopefully you've been able to have a look at the report and the two appendices, and I'll probably just pop them up as well and quickly run through them, because I'm conscious that, you know, we work with these documents day in, day out, but colleagues on this call probably see them, you know, once every 2 months or so on. So I just want to sort of make sure that people, you know, understand what we're sort of showing, and if there's any questions. So with the local growth deal, that actually totals £178 million, and it began in 2015-16, and it actually ran to the end of March 21. But we've been able to sort of extend a tail of that out into 21-22, and a little bit into 22-23. And then when we get to the Getting Building Fund, you'll see that that adds up to 16 million. So just to put it into a bit of context for you, these two funds, they represent over 70% of the total LEP spend. That's not to say they're the most important things, because you know, the work that James was just talking you through, you know, so that work comes in at, you know, 500,000, you know, sometimes with a little bit of extra money, but not a huge amount of money every year, but, you know, can have a massive impact as well. So it's not just the fact that they're big numbers that they are the most important, but, you know, it is a lion's share, and that's why we sort of report on them separately to you. So as I said, we take a detailed finance report to each of the board and the finance subgroup meeting. You might have heard us call it FFPMG, which is Finance Funding and Performance Management Group. We are very prudent as a LEP, and we always have a rolling budget forecast for 3 years, so that we don't get to the end of a financial year and then we think, well, what are we going to do next year? Have we got enough funding to, you know, keep managing the, you know, the big funds that come in from an operational perspective? So I think overall the LEP are very prudent and proactive as well in the way that they manage their funds. And a large part of the reports that we take are concentrated around these two programs. So I think what I'll do is, if I just briefly share appendices A and B with you, and I can talk you through them. So James managed to do the screen sharing. Let's see if I can not fail. So hopefully, can everybody see this spreadsheet that's popped up on the screen?
Yeah, can see that one.
There is it. Okay, that's good. Is that sorry, I can't see everyone now. Is that big enough for people to be able to see? I'll take it as it is unless someone shouts. So as I said before, if you look at this spreadsheet here, this is a summary of the local growth deal program. And if I was just to scroll down here, you can see that it comes in at £178 million. So this is the expenditure at the top, and then this is how we fund it at the bottom, and they're all different parts of local growth deal funding. And it's been going on for quite a while now, so back from 2015-16. And like most big funding programs, we sort of picked off maybe the low-hanging fruit first, so some of the simpler, more advanced schemes, and you'll be able to see that a lot of the spend early on in 2015-16 was around a lot of it was around sort of infrastructure schemes, some innovation here around the Cancer Immunology Centre, and also particularly a couple of big skills projects for the two colleges over in Eastleigh and the Isle of Wight College. The following year, we moved on to more around the big road scheme developments, and I know sort of some colleagues on the call will be more aware of where these are than others, but I sort of hailed from Fareham in my younger years, and I've sort of seen the benefits myself of the dualling and Newgate Lane South and Peel Common and so on. So there was quite a concentration of infrastructure there. What's going to join that up now as well? You can see that we fund Stubbington Bypass from here as well. That has taken quite a while to come to fruition. There was a judicial inquiry or review on that as well, but that's progressing really, really well now, and that's sort of showing that sort of there's a tail funding going out into the current financial year and a little bit into the following financial year. But I think you'll be able to see from this that there's quite a spread of where the LEP has used a local growth deal to fund different activities. South Sea Coastal Defences, that's happening at the moment. We actually pivoted quite quickly when we had the onset of the pandemic. So we decided to make some loan funding available to a couple of businesses that needed, if you like, a short-term cash flow to help them survive, and they've both done really, really well. So local growth deal itself, been really successful. Most of it's complete now. We have got some schemes that are live still at the moment, and as I said before, the low-hanging fruit, the easiest schemes were done. So you're looking at things like Stubbington Bypass, the North, and that's 25 million of LEP funding, but sorry, it's the two together, so there's 34 million has worth of LEP funding. North Whiteley, this is delivering, I think Steve might sort of mention this later, I think it's about 3,000 homes up in North Whiteley. So we're doing the funding the road scheme, because another reason of the local growth deal, the money's used as, if you like, as funding gap, because a developer probably wouldn't go ahead and build the houses if they had to fund the road as well. So the Solent LEP aren't really buying and funding a road. What they're doing is they're buying the houses at the end of it. So the funding from LEP enables that housing project to get going. And then this last large scheme going into the following financial year is the A326 highways improvements down towards Forley. So hopefully that will give members of the group an idea of where the local growth deal funding is spent. I was just going to share the Getting Building Fund shortly, but I just wondered if there's any questions on that one at the moment while it's up on the screen, or any general questions really.
Councillor McAvoy, sorry.
Correct. Just checking on something. You said that you buy the houses in that scheme, otherwise it might not get off the ground. Presumably you then sell the houses, or are they taken over again by the developer?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor McAvoy, it's probably my choice of words and the words that we use internally. So what the LEP does is, where they provide their funding, they expect outputs to come. So what the terminology we use, and it probably wasn't right to use on this group here, is that we don't physically sort of buy the houses, but what we do is we fund the developer with the road costs. So if you like, our £14 million ensures that the houses are built, so we get those outputs. So it's an enabling. So when I say sort of we buy them, it's our investment in the road that actually makes them come to fruition. So we don't have any any dealings with the houses as such.
So do you get that money back if you're just an enabler to get them off the ground, or is that a permanent gift that you've given to them?
It's a really good question, actually, because what we've done with this one, we considered this at the time, and we said, well, what about if the houses end up being sold for a huge profit at the end of it? Now, we expect the developer to take a profit. There's no problem with that, and we had an involvement in looking at that at the beginning of the scheme. But we've got something in here called an overage clause. So every year we have got a mechanism to see how the house sales are going, and are they being sold well ahead of the prices they thought they'd be sold for. So potentially we could get the whole £14 million back, or a proportion of it. And if we do, then that money would be reinvested in the area again. So the board would have another investment decision to make.
So you would get money back?
Potentially we would, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Bryant.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Thank you. I'm looking at the monies for the Junction 10 of the M27.
Yeah.
As I believe that it's still a little bit in the melting pot. But I see you've got it in for the year 21-22. Is that correct, or should it be sliding off to 22-23?
Yes, you're right, Councillor Bryant. Another good question is earlier on, the Leopard ring fenced some money or more money for the actual scheme itself. But I think, as you've alluded to, it's a very complex scheme, and it's taking time to get the full funding package together. So the LEP had to spend their money by the end of March 21. What the LEP didn't want, so they weren't able to leave, I think it was £14.9 million that was set aside to go towards the infrastructure. But the LEP board were very supportive of the scheme, so they invested overall just over, I think it's what are these two here, £5.5 million to go towards the business case. And the business case will allow other development partners to help unlock other funding. So this isn't for the construction, this is to develop that business case, which is a very expensive process. So yes, yes.
James, can I just come in there quickly?
Yeah, sure, Steve, yeah.
Thank you. So everything James said is absolutely spot on, and that investment has been crucial in terms of bringing the project forward. So we've undertaken we've commissioned an independent review of what that funding has enabled, and that's concluded that it has enabled the project to move forward significantly over the years that we've been funding it, and leaves it in a far better state than it otherwise would have been. From our perspective, and without trying to get too technical, it's achieved something called Project Control Framework Level 3 sign-off with the Department for Transport, which is a crucial milestone on the way to delivering that full business case. So as James quite rightly said, rather than lose the money for that particular scheme and have to return it to the centre, it was apportioned elsewhere, with a chunk of it kept to make sure we could advance that business case as far as we possibly could in the time that we had available, because all these funds ultimately are time limited. So it's a good news story. It's just taking longer to get to market than anyone would have liked.
Thank you so much. Yes, I believe we're still waiting for central government, aren't we, on some of it, on the small corporates.
Everyone's keeping their fingers crossed. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that explanation. Thank you.
Councillor Moon, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just a bit more interested in the COVID-19 loan fund. It would appear you've got 2.425 million in loans, and then you've obviously capitalised some of it to 325. Could you give me a bit more information about those loans? Are they on a fixed term? Are they on a payback period, or lump sum payback, or how would that system work?
Yeah, sure. So what we did, Councillor Moon, is we put together a loan fund quite quickly when the pandemic came along, because we were conscious that there there were a number of different areas that we could support. So some of it was small grants just to help business to survive, and Steve might talk about crowdfunder later, but we had some inquiries for the fund. We had about 6 or 7 inquiries, and we ended up funding 2 projects, both on the Isle of Wight. The basis of the loans are that they are interest free because we were able to ascertain that they would be state aid compliant if we did that. So state aid when we gave them, subsidy control now. They're on a 3-year payback term, but we actually offered the first 12 months as repayment free. When we did them, we did a lot of due diligence with the 2 businesses involved, and we were comfortable that that they could repay the loan because this is public funding. But both projects are doing really, really well. The repayments start around now, actually, so December and January for the other project. Both businesses have been able to survive the pandemic and are doing very, very well now. So that £2.75 million comes back to the LEP, and it will be recycled, and we'll use the loan funding. We'll use the funding again for, as directed by the board.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, members? Well, no, thank you. Thank you. Oh, sorry, who was that?
It's okay. No, it's just me, Councillor Denton. So all I'll do now, sort of very quickly before I hand over to Steve, is so I mentioned there are 2 funds. So you've got the local growth deal, which was the larger of the funds, and it's been running for the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Government offered us to bid for the Getting Building Fund as well. So this is almost like a small successor to the local growth deal. And the difference with this one is that we actually got the money, I would say, halfway through the financial year 2021. And we had about 18 months to spend it. So 7 projects were picked by the board through a proper due diligence process, and all of those projects are progressing well. They're all in the delivery phase. I think colleagues may be aware of sort of certain projects because they might be closer to the constituents that they work within, but the Port of Southampton cruise terminal, which took half of the fund, that's actually open now. And was sort of seen as a bit of a flagship project by government. So although it's a separate fund, it works on the same basis as the local growth deal. These projects are more, there's none actually completed at the moment, but they are due to complete by the end of this financial year. We feel that there might be a small tail that slips into the following financial year, but I think it's credit to the LEP executive and the LEP board for first of all applying and securing the funding, but also to get complex funding agreements in place and projects in delivery in such a short period of time has been, a real success. So again, any questions on that, quite happy to answer them.
Mr. Grego.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Chair. I was just wondering, relating to the nutrient mitigation programme, is that, because obviously as a planning authority we're sort of aware of that issue very, very deeply, sure. And I just wanted to know what the progress was on that, and was that a loan to the Wildlife Trust, and how what's the progress on that at the moment?
Sorry, James, do you want to go on the financial piece?
I think probably, Steve, you're as close to the financials as anything else. And I was going to ask if you could sort of, it is a loan, but I'll let Steve, because you're close to the actual details of the project, aren't you, Steve?
Very much so. So thank you for the question, Councillor. That's great. In terms of the partnership with the Wildlife Trust, that has developed quite closely actually over the last few months. We're at a point now where there is an executed funding agreement in place. There are a number of preliminary conditions in there which need to be concluded and addressed before the loan, you're absolutely correct, it was a loan, can be drawn down in order to enable the site purchase on the island, which can then be divided up into plots and sold for developer credits to unlock development, elsewhere across the Solent. The key point now is getting in place the Section 106 agreements with Portsmouth City Council, and I think there's one other local authority involved, and there is a cabinet meeting coming up before the end of this month, I believe, at which that issue will be addressed. Once the Section 106 agreements are in place, the land purchase will proceed. So for us at the moment, there's quite a big lump of money sitting there waiting to be drawn down, but it really is just a case of time now more than anything else. I think initially they were hoping to conclude that activity by the end of September. But as often is the case with these things, it's proven to be slightly more complicated. But progress is good, and we expect that cabinet meeting to conclude by the end of this month, as I say.
So when the loan is paid back, obviously developers are going to pay the Wildlife Trust, and the Wildlife Trust pays the loan back.
Absolutely.
Will there be a consideration of recycling that in order to buy future purchases of land? Because obviously the issue is going to be ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how quickly those credits are used up, because I'm aware that there seems to be an awful lot of latent demand within the system, as different authorities have brought forward different solutions to quite a technical problem over the last couple of years in varying ways. Ultimately, we'd need there to be a funding call that the LEP board would put together, and we do have a live one at the moment. But that's probably slightly too early to consider any sort of recycled funds from this. However, the green agenda, you only have to look at things coming out of the COP26 and responses to that. This isn't going away. The whole climate emergency piece will continue to be need to be addressed through various investments, and I'm sure those recycled funds would be available for that kind of activity in the coming years. That's the beauty of the loan funding, and we're sort of moving more and more toward that at the current point in time, because there's funds there in perpetuity. So as long as the repayments are made, we can keep recycling them for the benefit of the Solent economy, which is good news for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think if there's no more questions on sort of like anything detailed financial, and I'll come back in if anyone has got any, but I'll sort of hand over to Steve now, who'll talk more about the operational side and any sort of risks and so on to colleagues.
Excellent, thank you, James. So I'm not going to talk through the paper in massive detail, but there are about 4 areas that I did want to touch on quickly. So Section 5 of the report, which is toward the top of page 2, talks about the Getting Building Fund, and we've just talked about some of the individual projects within that. The paper makes reference to board approval in October for a couple of projects which have a delivery tail which extends beyond the deadline. That was approved, which is great, and the funding agreement variations have been executed now, which is good news as well. So they're in place, giving those projects certainty that they can deliver slightly beyond the March 22 deadline, which is positive. Section 6 of the report provides an update on our annual progress review process. We've extended that to all of our large capital projects, and that now includes the 7 Getting Building Fund schemes that we were talking about earlier. I wanted to include Appendix C in the report pack just to give SGF members an idea of the support guidance and sort of preparation really, which goes into each of these annual progress reviews, and also information around the risk matrix, which we use very actively to monitor, manage and hopefully mitigate the risk presented by the projects. We've now completed 36 of the 37 reviews, and they take the form of a face-to-face, albeit virtually via Teams or Zoom meeting. Historically, they have been in person, face-to-face. Obviously, this is across a range of schemes, and you've got a flavour of those from James's introduction, where he was talking about FE capital projects, highways infrastructure schemes, indeed something like the Hampshire and Isle of Wight nutrient mitigation scheme. So there's a whole range of things that we've invested in over time. But despite that, some common findings have emerged. So you won't be surprised to hear that construction projects, so those that are still in the construction phase, have suffered from unreliable delivery of materials as a result of supply chain issues. And that could be that they've ordered a certain type of brick and a different type turns up, or the same type turns up a week late, or there's just a lot less of it. So really real impact on the supply chain. COVID-19 has caused delays to many projects in terms of staff availability, as one would expect. At this point in time, these are mostly resolved, and certainly the projects have got very good at factoring those kind of impacts into their programs of delivery and activity, so they can kind of absorb and mitigate against that particular risk. The Brexit activity has directly affected a number of projects who are expecting to import goods or materials from overseas. So that's caused delays and significant cost increases in some cases. As a result, there have been some delays, and we've talked about projects requesting variations to their funding agreements to extend their delivery slightly, and we're trying to accommodate those as best we can. Notwithstanding those points, most projects within the programme continue to operate very well, with some positive and high-profile success stories over the last 12 months, one of which was the Princess Royal opening the Kinetic National Maritime Systems Centre and Innovation and Collaboration Hub, which we invested in, and that was opened back in May of this year. So despite the challenges faced by the projects in our programme, most of them are doing very well. What's useful about us asking this information and speaking to the businesses and beneficiaries over the year, obviously we have a number of touch points within the year, but the APR is a key one where we sit down with them face to face and talk through the last 12 months. That enables us to gather sort of intelligence from the ground, and we feed that back into central government on a regular basis, and we'll continue to do so. So that gives you a flavour of the APR process for us. And then there's just a couple of other points. Section 7 has a couple of updates. There's one on the Isle of Wight and New Forest rural SME funds. I just wanted to highlight the fact this has been a very, very positive partnership with an organisation called Natural Enterprise on the Isle of Wight. They've requested an extension to their defrayal deadline, which was set for September this year, to take them round to March next year. All the funds they've got have been committed to a range of projects. So effectively, the LEP is using their expertise in terms of their knowledge of the rural SME community. It's certainly not, expertise that we would have as a LEP, but we are buying that service effectively, and they're distributing grant funding on our behalf across the island and also in the New Forest. It's been massively successful. They've committed those funds, but similar to ourselves, they retain 15% of any grant payment until such time as the project in question has been completed. So they've got a small amount of funding still to be paid out. Furthermore, and talking about COVID impact, one beneficiary had to scale down their project as a result of COVID impact, and they've returned around £14,000 to Natural Enterprise for redistribution. Extending those defrayal deadlines is actually really, really important because it enables Natural Enterprise to hold another panel meeting to commit those returned funds and also to defray the final 15% payments. So the FFPMG, so our sub-board, agreed that request, which is excellent news, and that will give them from round to March next year in order to defray the remaining monies. And then finally, just a quick mention for crowdfunder, which has been a really important sort of plank in our response to COVID-19, certainly during the early phases of lockdown. And for us, the use of that platform was quite novel. And enabled SMEs to apply for really small levels of funding between £2,000 and £5,000 to cover core running costs whilst they were unable to trade, or indeed to meet the costs of reopening post-lockdown. And in really simple terms, the numbers are in the report, but the fund has supported more SMEs than originally hoped for, with less grant money than would originally been thought. And for every pound of our funding, another £4 of support from the crowd has been unlocked, which is a really, really good ratio. It's a new approach for us, as I said, and it enabled us to get funding out into the SME community really, really quickly. What we've seen in the last 2 quarters, which is probably not that surprising, is that applications for funding are much reduced. And that seems to be as a direct result of the economy reopening. We made a proposal, therefore, to FFPMG that between now and December, we would manage our exit from that particular platform to enable the balance of the funds, which I think is around £300, to be reassigned to any future funding calls. So it's enabled us to be incredibly agile, and we're now seeing that application rate is slow to an absolute trickle now. So I had a very positive call with Crowdfunder last week who agreed to this approach, and they are just as keen as we are to pause the funding stream for now, but keep it in such a way that we can turn the tap back on again very quickly if that is indeed dictated by future lockdowns. None of us know what's around the corner. The Solent LEP Fund page will remain on the Crowdfunder website as a case study of what the funding has achieved. So it's been a really interesting one for us, but I think now is the time to pause that funding stream and keep those funds for any future SME support. So that was all I wanted to say really on the paper. If there are any questions, Chair, I'm happy to take them now.
Any questions, members? Mr. Gregor.
Thank you, Chair. Steve, I was just wondering, you mentioned earlier about the local growth fund.
Yes.
The local growth deal programme was due to finish in the next couple of years. Do we know what's going to replace it?
So effectively, what replaced it initially anyway was the Getting Building Fund, which was the government sort of COVID response fund. It was quite different to the growth deal in that it was really focused on projects that were ready to deliver now, and that's that portfolio of 7 projects that James has showed in his appendices, and worth about 16 million. So in terms of scale, it's much reduced. I think what we have seen over the last 12 months is a shift toward more centrally managed funds. So rather than opening up funding calls to local enterprise partnerships, they're being managed via local authorities, and that seems to be driven by a desire to increase the political engagement. And we've seen a number of really positive announcements for the local area in terms of the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Renewal Fund as well. So there seems to be a movement in terms of large capital funding towards local authorities and away from local enterprise partnerships. So we're very much in the closed down phase of the growth deal, but still spending money, and very much in the delivery phase of the Getting Building Fund, and expect to move into closed down for that over the next sort of 12 to 18 months.
If I could just come in there, just to pick up on it, 'cause it's an important point, Jason. I think it's Steve's absolutely right. The LEP's role in relation to those large-scale capital funds moving forward is clearly changing. It doesn't necessarily mean that there is no role for the LEP. So to take an example, we started this meeting talking a bit about the delivery plan, and if I think about our sort of longer term sort of economic recovery strategy and Solent 2050 when it comes, there is going to be key projects in there that we want to see funded. That doesn't necessarily mean that those projects for the area need to be funded via the LEP. In fact, from our perspective, it doesn't necessarily matter, what route the funding comes through. The important thing is it comes to the area and is investing in those schemes that will take the sort of wider ambitions for the economy that local partners have forward. So if I take a really sort of here and now example, one of the sort of areas around growth priorities that's within the sort of marine and maritime sector within our delivery plan is around expansion at Portsmouth International Port. and they were obviously successful recently in their application to government for funding through the funds that Steve's mentioned, the Levelling Up Fund, the communities fund. So that brings into play, I think, moving forward, the sort of strategic role that the LEP has in relation to those capital funds to sort of set that framework. And I think that continues to be important, because government will still want to see the that there is a strong strategy locally, and that these sort of applications, whoever they're from, are in line with that broader economic vision in the local area, and also that sort of advocacy and convening power that I touched on with the LEP, because we would be very keen to work in partnership with colleagues across local authorities, but obviously across academia, business, etc. as well, to support those sorts of funding applications that are so important for the area moving forward. So I just thought I would add that, because it's not certainly not a case of the LEP's not interested anymore if the funding's not coming directly through the LEP. We absolutely are, and retain that support for the area in these capital programs as we go forward.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, James. Could I ask that we note the report as listed in item 2.1, please? Thank you, members. We'd move to item 5, which is overview of the Solent LEP assurance process. Unfortunately, I didn't catch the name of who's presenting this item.
This one, I'm just going to do a quick introduction, Chair, on this one, and then I'm going to hand over to Paul, who introduced himself earlier. So some members of SGF won't be aware of this, but those that were involved prior to change their membership recently, at the last meeting, we did have a request for SGF to understand a little bit more about the audit processes that we have in place at the LEP. And that forms part of a wider assurance framework that we have, and it's a key element of the work that we do, but it's not the only element. So broadly speaking, I just wanted to highlight this, a little bit simplistic, but broadly speaking, we have sort of 3 key areas of accountability that help us to demonstrate assurance. First is public accountability. That stretches from everything from sort of direct public engagement, whether that's through consultation, whether that's through managing inquiries, and the sort of transparency publication of information that we have on our website, etc., or deputations at meetings themselves, through to the role of the Solent Growth Forum, the public forum, and the role that you all play as elected members in that regard, and also our accountable body and the overview and scrutiny that they provide to our work. And our Section 151 officer is required to provide an assurance statement to government on an annual basis that provides that confidence that any decisions taken are in line with the sort of assurance frameworks we have. We've got an accountability to government, as you can imagine. They are our primary funder, and very interested in where this money goes and how, what the performance is of that. So we do have regular monitoring on all those funds that Steve and James have talked about, and that we have to comply with, alongside an annual performance review process, which is a really important part of the work that government do in this area. So they have a mid-year conversation with us, which is a little bit more of an informal process, and how are things getting on across the year against our delivery plan and sort of the investments that we're making, and then a very formal annual performance review process where the LEP is actually graded, and that rates anything from they could grade us as having major concerns with the LEP through to exceptional performance. Pleased to say that we've always been in seen in a positive light there across all the sort of categories that government look at. But it's an important part of that process. And the final one is that corporate accountability. James touched on this in his update earlier, but just to put that in a broader context, there's obviously the role of our board that our board play in terms of scrutiny, and that they apply to the work that we're doing, and that is supported in a number of ways. So importantly, through our membership. So our board are elected by members of the company, whether that's businesses, local authorities, or indeed university partners electing their representatives to the board. So there is an accountability to the membership there. There is also, it's not just the board holding us to account, it works at an executive level as well, and we've set up a dedicated corporate performance governance and compliance function, of which Steve mentioned in his introduction his performance management role with the team, and Lauren, who's on the call, is our governance and compliance manager. So really important that we look at that at an executive level. And on a broader corporate basis, the board have established a funding, finance and performance management group, FFPMG, that James mentioned in his update. That panel has got a range of key roles in relation to accountability and performance management, and scrutinising the sort of detail of performance following board decisions, etc. But one of the key areas that they look at is they effectively form our corporate audit committee as an LEP, and that's a really important role for them in terms of setting an annual audit plan, considering the detail of audit activity that comes forward. So FFPMG play that key role. They commission that internal audit activity through our accountable body, Portsmouth City Council, and I'll let Paul introduce himself. I will hand over at this point for Paul to talk in a little bit more detail about the work that the internal audit are doing with us generally, and specifically in the current year as well. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Rich. Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. So yeah, to give you a bit of background, obviously we're the internal audit service of Portsmouth City Council, but we do have the SLA with SLEP. You'll see in the paper that you might have noticed that it looks like the agreement has run out, but we have just recently renewed that one, so we do have a new SLA in place with the SLEP. So as I said, I'm the Deputy Chief Internal Auditor. The Chief Internal Auditor for the SLEP is Elizabeth Goodwin. If you see her name, that's what that relates to. And we have a team of auditors within Portsmouth that we use across the SLEP for the various audits that we have. In the paper, you'll see I included the annual opinion for 2021. So on an annual basis, we form an annual opinion on the internal governance framework, and that is based on the work that we have completed in that previous year. So as you will see, for 2021, we had a reasonable assurance level. We have 4 assurance levels, and reasonable is a good place to be. Getting to full assurance would generally mean that we're doing all the audits and not finding any risk, which is probably somewhat unrealistic given the nature of some of the work that SLEP does, and with the money involved across all the sites that we look at, the different councils. We don't have a full assurance opinion across anywhere, so that's just kind of to add a little bit of context for you. Moving on, I've kind of given a little bit of narrative as to how we come up with our audit plan. So at the SLEP and across all the sort of sites that we look at, we have what we call an audit universe, and this is where we look at all the auditable activities that we could look at. And certainly with the SLEP, we have a lot more collaboration with the chief exec and some of the directors as to determining what we put in our audit plan, because they kind of know the areas better. A lot of some of our SLEP work is kind of directed by some of the grants that the SLEP gets. A lot of those will come with conditions, so we do a lot of work on verifying the grants have been spent as per the conditions. But we do also look at some of the standard things that we would look across normal organisations, such as payroll and those sort of day-to-day activities that the SLEP are also responsible for. The audit plan is attached as an appendix, just so you can kind of see what we're looking at this year, and as you'll see, it's very heavy on a number of different grants that we do have to look at and sign off for the LEP. And lastly, I've just put in a little bit there about the public sector internal audit standards, because a question we often get asked is who audits the auditor. So that is a set of standards that we have to comply with, and we do have to have external assessments. And as you will see, we had an external assessment in 2017-18, which we was confirmed that we were meeting the standards there. I wasn't proposing to say too much else, but obviously happy to take any questions. As I understand, audit isn't always a subject that people are too aware of, so feel free to fire away.
Councillor McAvoy.
Yes, thank you. As you don't have full assurance of us, would you like to highlight a couple of the areas that you think we should know about that need improving?
It would be difficult to go into specifics because obviously there's a good 15 to 20 audits that we would have looked at in the previous years, and some of them might be areas that in a public forum I may not be able to go into a huge amount of detail on. I'll have to kind of defer to Rich on that one and what sort of ones we can say, I suppose. You're on mute, Rich.
Sure, we can't hear you.
Apologies for that. Thank you. I've nearly made it to the end of the meeting without doing that, so apologies. Yeah, I think Paul's right in terms of the detail of some of those audits. They flow through to the to FFPMG, and some of the information is confidential. I think we could talk in a a high level though, Paul, of some of the areas that we have been looking at, and certainly for me, the sort of reasonable assurance rating is and the work that we do with audit is not we don't look at that as negative. We do look at this as a really positive process, and we are committed to continual improvement. A big focus of the activity in the last year's annual audit activity was around our SME grant funding awards, and specifically in relation to COVID response activity and the processes there. And we were keen to get audit looking at those areas of activity in quite some detail, because we were, like all organisations, responding to a changing situation very rapidly at pace. You've heard updates on some of the programs we put in place already today, whether it's the loan funds that James talked about, the sort of rural resilience funds that we worked through Natural Enterprise on, or indeed the crowdfunder activity that Steve updated on. And I think there's learning points for us that come out of that activity that we can take forward. And even though we do things rapidly and at pace, it's very important that we do continue to have the assurance around the use of public funds, essentially, in terms of how they're administered and how they're used by end beneficiaries, in a sense. So we have looked at learning points throughout our process, and through new process as well. I mean, Steve mentioned that crowdfunder program as an example was a completely new way of operating for us as an LEP. Looking at investing through a crowdfunder platform like that, it's not something that we've ever done before. So it's it's a completely different way of working, and we are looking at our claims processes moving forward, and our due diligence processes moving forward, looking to, whilst I appreciate what Paul says, we always want to strive for that full assurance in the future. So looking at areas like that, which are learning points, would be a big focus for us. I think,
clearly, COVID has been quite a steep learning curve for lots of the distribution of these funds. And from the New Forest District Council, I can commend the way they have distributed the funds, some of which have come from you. But I would like to know that you have clearly identified, or the auditor has clearly identified to you, where some of the less positive outlets have been, and I'd like to know that you actually have a plan in place to highlight these and address how you're going to move forward to eliminate those issues, because, as you said, it is public money, and we need to, not that anybody is deliberately mishandling them, but we need to know that it's not just being pushed to one side, and that they're identified, and that you have a plan of a way forward to overcome these issues.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I can see Paul's raised a hand there, so we'll let Paul come in as well. If I can just respond directly, the audits that we get from colleagues at Portsmouth always have recommended actions and next steps attached with them. that we agree, and we monitor that on a forward plan of activity. So it's not just about doing an audit and that was the result and let's all carry on. There is absolutely an activity plan which again we take through to FFPMG to look at the detail of in terms of next steps, and we track that through moving forward. So there are at an executive level there is that plan to address the actions identified within audit. At a second level to that, there is an additional part of the process, because it's all that's really helpful for us, but we do also want that independent verification of, okay, we've implemented a change, what does that mean? Has that addressed the issue? And we might think it has, but actually that independent perspective is important. And Paul might want to come in here. So a lot of the work that audit do is actually re-auditing some of the areas that they have looked in the past, so that they can assess, have those actions been addressed, have new processes been implemented, and what the outcome of that is. Has that worked as intended? Because when you're looking at new process, there is always that important feedback loop. So Paul, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything about the sort of ongoing and follow-up work that you and the team do.
Yeah, that's what our plans come in on. So if we do raise any what we call exceptions, which are essentially risks that we've identified, we do have a programme of following up either in the same financial year or the next financial year, depending on the severity. All the ones we've had for the Select weren't of a severe nature that we needed to follow them up immediately, but we followed up in the next financial year. And the LEP does have a good record of implementing the actions that they say they're going to. We have what we call agreed actions, whereas we don't make recommendations. We sit down with the client, obviously the SLEP, and discuss how best to mitigate the issue we found. We put a timescale on it. It's owned by a person. As Rich says, they have an internal kind of team that monitors that on an ongoing basis. And then, yes, we come in to do a second audit, what we call a follow-up audit, where we look at the action, see whether the risk has been mitigated and the action has been implemented, and then make another assurance level based on that. And the follow-up impact and the actions, whether they've been completed, also goes into that annual opinion. We factor that in as well. And as I say, SLEP does have a good record of trying to implement the actions they say they're going to.
I think I would still like to see some sort of plan in place, so that when we have a meeting, you can say certain things were highlighted and they have now reached the required standard. I realise that auditors have to justify their existence. I'd like to know that some of the things that have been highlighted have been, valid concerns, which I'm sure they probably are. But I would just like to be able to look back in a year's time and say, yes, this, that, and the other was highlighted, and we were able to show that we had taken that on board and how we've addressed it. So it's just looking after taxpayers' money, really.
Yeah, and I think that is helpful, and I think the follow up with which we do with FFPMG, it would be good to complement that with the follow up with Solent Growth Forum as well. So if I could take that one away, Councillor, and speak to Tony in his role as chair moving forward, we can look to add something to the forward plan, because I do think a follow up would be a good thing for us to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. That's it on the items on the agenda, except for any other business, if anybody wants to bring anything else to the fore. No? Well, in which case, I thank everybody for attending today, and no doubt we'll get a notification of the next meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.